reConstruct, which is a study into the book of Nehemiah. You can join us for this journey, and I'm glad that you are here today. Glad to have you along for the ride. If you'd like all of the information, all of the reading plan, you can get all of that information by visiting that URL that's right there on the screen, go.christtable.today/reconstruct. And it's not too late to be involved, and we are glad to have you. Today, we are on day 9, Nehemiah chapter 4, verse 15 through 23. As we have looked into this text over the last few weeks, and especially the last few days, what we have realized is that there is some tension between Nehemiah and the surrounding communities who don't think that this building project of the wall should move forward. And what we learned most recently in the text is that there was beginning to be a feeling of some of those same sentiments of negativity, of tiredness, of questioning in the people. And so Nehemiah has kind of doubled down on this as being God's project for God's reasons, which was questionable at best and outright fabrication at worst. But here, really, the conflict now is the fear in Nehemiah that the surrounding communities are going to come in and are going to physically prevent the work on the wall from being completed. And that's where we find ourselves today in verse 15. When our enemies heard that we knew of their plans, the plans in the previous verses to end the construction of the wall, to delay it because they didn't see the benefit or the value in it. And as we've said, we don't think that God wanted the wall to be built either. So Nehemiah is kind of out on his own here. But Nehemiah is still, to the people, and I think maybe to himself, championing God, that it was God who had frustrated them and frustrated their plans. We're not sure if Nehemiah has convinced himself, but he certainly is trying to convince the people. And oftentimes those individuals, as you well know, who want to not be the villain in the story, have to convince themselves that they have been validated and have valid reasons for what they're doing. And Nehemiah seems to have done that by this point. So we all return to the work on the wall. But from then on, things are going to change. Only half my men, Nehemiah says, worked, while the other half stood guard with spears, shields, bows, and coats of mail, which must have really just gotten under Nehemiah's skin to have to divert resources to guard rather than build the wall. It's interesting, though, that Nehemiah says that God frustrated the plans of those who were against the wall, but yet Nehemiah still has to divert his resources to guarding the wall itself. I just have to think that if God were fully in the building and the protection of the wall, then he would not have simply just frustrated the plans of those who were against the wall once. God would have frustrated the plans fully, completely, and permanently of those who were against the wall. So to me, it feels a bit as though if Nehemiah is having to divert half or more of his resources to simply completing this project, then it may well be that God's not fully in it. Why would he frustrate the plans once but not frustrate the plans every single time? If God's in it, I think that we should be expecting that God would fully handle it, that God would not leave a job half done. And I think that there is some payoff in our own journey as well, that if God is in it, he's going to fully handle it. Many of us are on journeys in our life where we feel as though we are out in the wilderness. We are no longer where we began on the journey. We, by faith, walked out of a relationship. By faith, we walked out of a job. By faith, we walked out of a friendship circle, out of a city. Some of us, even by faith, we walked out of a church or a faith community that was not healthy or that was toxic. And we have not yet fully reached the destination as to where we're going. You don't have another relationship to place that with. You've not been able to find the same type of community or the same type of job that provided for you in the way that you not necessarily just wanted, but really needed. You've not found a faith community, a church that fits where your heart is, one that's healthy. If God's in it, he's going to fully handle it. He's going to bring you fully through this wilderness that you're in. And I think that Nehemiah and the people should have been able to expect that if God had fully handled and frustrated the plans, then God had fully handled and frustrated the plans. And so Nehemiah's questionable diversion to guarding the wall may have been the right thing to do on the surface in a season of fear and concern, but if God was in it, wasn't even necessary for him to do that. So the leaders stationed themselves behind the people of Judah who were building the wall, and the laborers carried on their work with one hand supporting their load and one hand holding a weapon. And so really, really grinding this production, this rebuilding and reconstruction of the wall to a halt. All the builders now have a sword belted to their side. That will not just slow you down, but it will instill concern and fear and worry in you. The trumpeter stayed with me to sound the alarm. Trumpet could be heard resounding everywhere across the area in which the wall was being built. Then I explained to the nobles and officials and all the people, the work is very spread out and we are widely separated from each other along the wall. So Nehemiah is not hitting the deadlines, which I'm guessing Nehemiah has set for himself because he has been moving quickly on this wall in order to get it done before somebody changes their mind or somebody frustrates the plan. So Nehemiah says, when you hear the blast of the trumpet, rush to wherever it is that it is sounding, because there is an enemy there trying to prevent the wall from being built. But Nehemiah says, or doesn't say, that we will fight to the death. He doesn't say that we will frustrate their plans. He doesn't say that we will, he says God will fight for us. Now, I'm guessing he means that mostly metaphorically. I don't know why everybody would be rushing to the site just to stand there with swords on their side watching what was going down while God literally physically shows up. I do think he's probably speaking metaphorically, then our God will fight for us, but the language here still is frankly manipulative. Nehemiah continues to try to bind up both God's willingness to see this thing through and the people's willingness to see this thing through, and tries to bind them up together in order to fight for his project. And we've said this from the very beginning. This was Nehemiah's project. The king didn't seem to want it. The people who lived in the community didn't want it. God has specifically spoken against the wall being built for the reasons that they're building it. And there are many people in the community who are also having concern about this wall being built. And so Nehemiah, as much as he is a foreman, is also a marketing expert trying to bind up and convince both God and the people that this is good, that all of the time and resources and energy that are being put into this are necessary. And now he's trying to leverage them not just to do the work and to approve of it going forward, but now to fight on behalf of it, to put their lives on the line for this to be a finished project. So not only are they wearing swords, not only are they doing double duty as guards and also as construction workers on the wall. Now they're working from early until late, from sunrise to sunset, and half the men are always on guard. I also told everyone living outside the walls, now you're not going home. Stay in Jerusalem. That way they and their servants could help with guard duty both night and day during the workday. There is a phrase there, in fact, at the very beginning of the verse, my translation says we worked early and late from sunrise to sunset. The actual Hebrew says they work until the stars come out, which was such an unusual situation that people would work in that way because it was counter to what God had commanded about Sabbaths and time, that this phrase that's used here actually becomes a phrase that rabbis continue to use in their writing for decades and even for centuries. This idea of until the stars come out, working and applying yourself and putting yourself to something until the stars come out. And it's not a positive phrase. It's a negative phrase. But what happens is this gets woven into the fabric, not just of the rebuilding of the wall, but into the community of itself. It becomes something of an expectation long term. The decisions that we make oftentimes in the moment that seem wise but are unwise and ungodly, such as work ethics, become the situation, the scenario in which the rest of our life often is lived and measured and judged by. And that's what happens here. The work ethic for the people changes even after the wall is finished. The expectations are still oftentimes in place. During this time, none of us, not I, nor my relatives, nor my servants, nor the guards who were with me, ever took off our clothes. We carried our weapons with us all the times. Even when we went for water, it's over the top. When the project is more important than the pain inflicted, it's probably not of God. We don't see Nehemiah ever having a conversation or a reflection about the imposition upon the people, on their lives, on their families' lives, having to stay in the city rather than go back home, now working double duty from daylight to dark, having to support this and now put their own lives on the line over this wall. It's unreasonable expectations. Supported supposedly by a mandate from God. And it puts the project over the people. Whenever the project is more important than the people, whenever the price that the people pay is higher than the need, it's not of God. I see this. I was online and yesterday, day before, was hearing about churches using volunteers and what a great thing that was, and how this church had written a book and how they operate almost completely on volunteer labor and service, and it's a large mega church. And they were doing the numbers, and I was looking at the numbers of the folks who attend and the size of the ministry, and then the volunteer load that they were saying that they were using. And other people were looking at that volunteer load saying, well, I can't imagine having 200 volunteers involved and running a church. Well, 200 volunteers involved in running a church of 2,000 to 3,000 is not enough people. Now, 200 or 300 volunteers in a church of 200 or 300, that's probably enough to share the workload. This church was not an example of what to do. This church, from the outside, from people who were uneducated in what it takes to operate a church, we're looking at that and saying, this is a wonderful thing to expect this out of individuals. And yet I'm looking at that saying these individuals are being run into the ground in that context of that church. This isn't a positive example. This is a cautionary tale. And I see churches of multiple sizes and multiple ministries large, medium, small, oftentimes doing this, and that is over relying on individuals because the work is so important. You're working for God. Give a little bit more. What could be more important in your life than God? Your weekends don't matter. Serve every weekend. Your evenings don't matter. We need you. God needs you. You should want to do this. There's a difference, I think, between volunteering out of our excess, and volunteering out of our reserves and depleting them. I'll say almost always unnecessarily, because the project is never more important than the people. This is what is happening here in Nehemiah now is over expectation and over promising, over leaning onto people and into their lives for reasons that are questionable at best and anti-God at worst. When the project is more important than the pain inflicted, it's probably not of God and should be reevaluated. Until tomorrow, happy reading.